Good afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining this panel discussion. When I was invited to sort of speak at the Future Skills Conference, I accepted immediately because I think given the kind of world we are in, the attention on how work has changed, how the workforce is evolving, and what's happening to the workplace is making a fundamental change in what is happening with people's jobs and possibly their future plans for a career. And I think the currency of having a path into the future will really be around skills. To me, this conversation was, I was a bit selfish because I wanted to learn from all of you, and I'm sure our audience wants to as well. So I'm going to sort of, if I look at all of you, you are possibly in your organizations the stewards of this new currency. As people look to build new skills, as people look towards new careers, they're really going to look to each of us to sort of help them navigate into this next normal. And we are going to actually look to them to tell us how we can be of help in this journey. If I look back at 2019, I wanted to sort of kick off with getting a perspective of what is that one sacred cow. And I know cow is not necessarily the best animal to reference at the moment, but if you look back at 2019, what is that one sacred element in talent development that you think will change in the future, or has either accelerated or has suddenly become much more important than it was, or something that you always thought could never change? What has that been for you? I'm going to start with Swatee. She works in an industry which possibly is closest to some of the challenges of this outbreak. So what are you seeing as you look at talent development? What is that one thing that has really changed for you?
I think the way we are looking at talent today is that how they can be so relevant and how they can be engaged and at the same time contribute in ways which are very meaningful for the organization and for themselves at a personal level as well. So if I'm looking at talent, I think what really has changed is the way talent equations are spanning out. So if you look at it, there's a lot of collaboration, there's a lot of synergy across teams that is happening. So from an individual, the focus is now towards teams because, you're pulling in people together to keep the tempo, and the momentum along the way as change keeps happening. That is one thing. Second, I also think there is a lot of focus on these futuristic skills. There's so much of talk about it. But when we say futuristic skills, what comes to my mind is the future is so uncertain. We can't really put a number or a word and say, this is the skill that will make a difference. But to my mind, what can really make a difference is the learnability or the learning agility of people and of talent. So we really need to up that. And we have to find out ways in which people can learn on their own and learn faster, smarter, better. How can we help them do that? So therefore, that is something which is important. Third is that, everything is in a state of flux, fluid, flowing. So the ability to maneuver through these uncertain business scenarios to ensure continuity of demands and being purposeful, finding meaning and purpose in work and in life in these turbulent and challenging times, I think that is also key. So then that brings me to another aspect of talent development, which is the innate part of it, the inner self of talent development, which is more like the core of talent. So can we help people be more human, that part of it? So these three things stand out for me.
I think, the ask seems a little daunting because, everything seems to be, like you talked about being fluid. I think how work is getting done has become fluid. Where the workforce is operating from has become fluid. And I think that poses a lot of stress on some of the skills that people need to show. I'm going to sort of move the conversation and, Anupam, maybe you want to comment on this. this point that Swati talked about, really the innate per individual. How are you seeing, the learners who you support in your organization or in your community respond to this ask for some of the things that Swati mentioned are becoming much more important for them to sort of demonstrate? How are the learners responding to that?
So I think, Prithvi, to start off with, one of the things that is true for all of us, right, is that as individuals, we are always learning, consciously, unconsciously, intuitively, right? However, when we start to look at learning in an organization context, we sometimes look at it as an event, right? Or it is something that I need to do. But the reality is we're all always learning. So I think in some ways that agility that we're talking about from a learning perspective is intrinsic to all of us because we are all always learning. I think what we have seen, at our organization at Cisco is that especially if, you enable and empower your employees to learn at their own pace. You enable it through technology. You enable it in a manner where the learning is anchored in business needs, and it also looks at the learner experience regardless of where the learner is sitting or the platform of demonstration that you have. I think we've seen a lot of people leaning in. The other interesting shift that we're also seeing, and Swati also spoke about it, is previously there was a lot of focus on skill sets that one could call technical or functional or professional skills, and soft skills, the so-called soft skills, were not necessarily at the same level. But I think increasingly so, you're starting to see more investment in the soft skills. And honestly, I call them the hard skills. While we refer to them as the soft skills, they're the harder ones to actually move the needle on. Because as the world is changing, as the way that we're doing business is changing, as the way that we work is changing, the investments in some of those skills are also starting to become very, very important. And we're seeing that across organizations as well.
Thanks, Anupam. So, this piece around if the softer skills are so much harder to actually, impart to individuals, let me sort of switch the conversation to Amit. What are some of the things that, how were you doing it? How were you possibly, what were the tools or the methods that you were using to impart these soft skills? And I'm sort of going to divide pre-COVID and post-COVID kind of. I think the world is sort of, got a new halves now. So what were you doing then that possibly now has become more difficult to do or become easier to do, given that, as Anupam said, it's, possibly these are the skills that are the hardest and the most required for people to pick up at the moment?
Sure. So I think let me start with, the kind of quick connect you had built in. What's the change that has happened from 2019 to 2020, and then let me connect back again those two aspects of it. So a huge shift in terms of how people are learning today. One is what is missing is the classroom is missing, right? The physical classroom is missing. So we had a lot of blended approaches where we had classroom sessions plus the e-learning sessions as well as the self-learning sessions which were on. And all of these were completely kind of aligned to the competency frameworks and the functional frameworks. And ultimately, what is it that is connecting to business as the outcomes there. So that's one. What has made a shift is 2020. It's all about how exactly can we gain the business alignment again in terms of helping the business again with numbers. But this time it's going to be virtual. And this time, I think what Anupam mentioned is that soft skills becomes really the hard skill because we'll need more of that soft skills between people. And that becomes like the grease and the oil in the entire system. And, it's rightly said that all the kind of problems and in any organization and challenges come out of the communication problem, right? 90% of the same is this. And we have a big challenge now where the classroom is missing, the physical presence is missing. So the shift that we need to make is to think on how do we build trust further? How do we keep the trust on in the organization, right? Because the first thing I remember when the lockdown was announced, suddenly everybody said, oh, how will we ensure that people are working at home? That was the first thing that came out. I think we need to work something on how do we keep building that trust. how is it that we can empower people to still go ahead and meet those numbers? And what are those functional skills involved? What are those soft skills involved? Relationship skills, interpersonal skills involved into the same. So I think that has, the medium has changed, but the need has increased much more as far as soft skills is concerned. So I think that's my viewpoint as of now for how do we move further is building in more trust and engagements that build trust there.
And that has become, trust is a word that one of the things that I've been sharing with most of our clients and most of the people I interact with is that companies who had a trust deficit going into 2020, for them to recover and get back to where they need to be will be much harder than those whose trust goodwill is high and people whose culture has a big sort of bank balance where people actually believe that this is an organization that will take care of them and keep them safe. So it's an interesting twist because Harpreet, you work in a company that is possibly in consumer goods, or at least is sort of very influenced by consumer preferences. You have retail stores, you have channels which possibly were all locked down. How did you talking about if trust is created by doing a combination of behaviors or which are possibly softer in nature, how did you maintain that trust both for your workforce? What were some of the elements that go into keeping that trust when your workforce suddenly doesn't have a shop to actually go to sell in, or is basically is actually has faced significant turbulence given the lockdown especially during the lockdown phase? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So for the others, so I'm from Raymond, and we are a non-essential commodity, and we sell premium tuxedo suits, and definitely that's
not for everybody. For some of us, maybe it's an essential commodity. But
so wow, love to hear that. Yeah. So definitely, I think as a industry and as a company, we took a hit on that, and we had to let go of a couple of stores. And when we're talking about trust got broken there. Right. And we were very transparent in our approach. And we said why we are doing this, right? And now if you just say, we want you to get back to us again, and just the talking wouldn't have really helped, right? So the best was being very transparent in terms of what's happening in the organization, why are we doing it? And second, building communication with each one of them. So we were very clear. We listed what can get back the trust. The trust has been broken. Right? We said, okay, let's start role modeling. Whatever leaders are saying, they need to see that happen. And that is something which really helped. And we also had a change in the leadership. And it was really beautiful to see the new CEO coming in and from a very different business and just taking in and, with the entire employees and raising a town hall and all the questions and beautifully answering all of them with transparency and integrity. I think that bit really helped us. And second, I think we were very quick in moving online. So we had the technology to engage with the retail staff. So within a week's time, we kept them engaged, and the engagement was just on managing the mental well-being of each one of us. I think including us, we didn't know what's happening, and we didn't even know when would it stop, right? That also made them feel, because everybody went behind screens and there was a lot of insecurity of losing their jobs. And what we said, we have to keep the engagement going to make them secure that, the company is in touch with them and their jobs are secure. So I think within a week's time, we did that. And we had about 1,200, 1,500 at one go. From technology standpoint, we could afford to do that. And these two things, keeping them engaged around a manner which was very sensitive to them, and being very, very transparent right from the leadership team really helped us.
Thank you. No, I think, I used, before I joined KPISOFT, I used to be with HCL Technologies. And one of the tenets of was that trust through transparency. So both these words sort of resonate with me very well. So I'm going to switch the conversation to Guy, right? So Harpreet said, her industry was considered non-essential, and based on what consumers actually needed, or at this point of time, banks have largely been open, all through this difficult time. What was the role that talent development, or some of the things that you possibly had invested in the past? What actually stood you in good stead to keep your workforce committed to actually continue to performing? And I'm a Standard Chartered customer, and I've seen a few of your colleagues in the industry. The interactions with them didn't change. It seemed like they were always available, present for any conversation for people to have with them. So what is some of the things that you had worked on, possibly in your experience in the past, that has held you in good stead for people to really step up to deliver even essential services?
No, I'd love to answer that. The first thing I would say, though, is banking was essential, but me and my team were considered non-essential, and we went to work from home very quickly. I could pick up on a couple of the points that have already been made around trust and communication. So as an organization, we moved very quickly around communication in terms of what was happening, what the impact was, and then how we could support. So there's been a really big focus on well-being for people. I think that's come up, and I think all of the panel here and companies who have done that. We also put very significant attention to our people leaders, our line managers. So we had calls just with them globally on what they needed to support their people. And I'm hoping the experience you've had with Standard Chartered, staff has continued, because of that, because that trust equation is really strong. So I'd put it down to that. From a learning point of view, we were fortunate enough to have been planning over the last couple of years some very significant changes around delivery of learning, particularly digital. And we launched that about 4 weeks into lockdown. And so the timing in some ways couldn't have been better. And it's really interesting, the experience of people. And I'm sure for all pre-pandemic, face-to-face, the view from many of our people was, if you don't send me to the classroom, I'm not doing something online. That's changed enormously. I think, one, because, people are at home, they're kind of forced to. But I think secondly, they've had the opportunity to see the value that can be generated. Now, not everything will be digital or virtual. Yeah, I'm quite sure some things will go back to face, when people are back. But because we had that, because the communications were strong, because we'd equipped people leaders, and because we've been very transparent, actually we've had a really good response. And in fact, we ran a global learning week this week across the company. We had our chairman and CEO involved, and just the culture that's being built because of this trust, because of what we're making available, is hugely different to what it was 2, 3, 4 years ago. Actually, maybe there's one more point I'd pick up. So we talked earlier about talent development. One of the things that came out this week in our Global Learning Week, we built future skills academies covering technical and human skills. Really interesting. What people are asking for is, tell me how these future skills are going to be important for me in my role. So it's all very well for us to throw out data and analytics and digital and cyber and those skills across the organization. But what's coming back to us is, can you show me and give me these skills and how they will apply to my job in future, and how I can access those. So it's gone from a broad approach to what I think will eventuate more over the next 12 to 18 months is make it really specific to my role, make it really specific to the roles that are going to exist that will change.
Yeah. I think that the line of sight as to why am I investing time in something now, given all the challenges that are ahead, I think people are going to demand that line of sight to be very clear and be very loud about asking that off talent development. So, if I sort of round this off back to Kavita, most learning organizations have been talking about digitization and using technology to deliver learning. And I'm aware of, some of the technology at, that a guy you've implemented at Standard Chartered, we actually work with as well. So, I think I'd be curious to hear, how have you seen this push in learning towards using technology, using digital tools? What are you seeing? Is that how has that changed? Where is the pull coming from? Or is it still, it used to be, at least about till a few years ago, the learning head used to be flying the lone flag, asking for investments and budget because he or she saw the future possibly a little earlier than everybody. What are you seeing now that, this is the world has changed so much?
I think one of the biggest changes is that technology has become the new normal. It has pervaded every aspect of our lives, personally as well as professionally. While yes, earlier the learning at the CLO would be the one going around, asking for investments. I think today, especially in the tech space, it's growth opportunities that really drive the investment. Depending on what the technologies are, and because a lot of technical training has to happen on a technology base, the larger thrust of learning happens in that space already. So when we moved to working from home very quickly, about 98% of my workforce works from home, it was very easy to make that transition. We had already a lot of tools in place. So we have a DigiB, which is called Digital Behaviors Tool in place, which allows us to talk to senior leaders and the people managers within the organization on what are specific skills that they need to build on to deal with certain situations. In this case, it was how do you deal with the pandemic and the people that you are on. But before all of that, I think the moment the entire pandemic started up, the first question we wanted to explore was, what do we mean by remote? So we came up with two very distinct meanings, right? So one is, of course, operating effectively from a distance where you're working from home. But the second one was also where you're very distant, unapproachable, and we didn't want to move into that space. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to create digital ways for our managers to build the personal connections and strengthen working relationships in a digital format. So we rolled out the DigiB campaign, had lots of conversations, training or virtual training sessions with our line managers to help facilitate those conversations. I think it's also a series of town halls, webinars, one-on-one connects that we had with the people. So in the last 4 months, I think we have run over 500 webinars on various topics, whether they are technical, whether they, so it could be as much as, learning Java to mindfulness to yoga to, these are great, one-pot meals that you can make and save so much of time. And we ran very focused campaigns as well. So we ran programs like 21 days of transformation. So we said, okay, on an average, you take about an hour and a half to get to work. Give us that hour and a half, and over 21 days, you will be upskilled into a larger role with larger responsibilities because you would have upskilled yourself. But so we are not asking you for any additional time. We're not taking time away from your family. We're not saying put in more hours after you finish your 8 hours of work. We're saying the normal time that you would have taken to travel, give us that. So things like that have really made an impact. But you still need to bring the humanness into technology. Use technology to drive the message home, but the human aspect still needs to be there always.
And I think that's something sort of I picked up across all your comments. And I love the words you use that, remote has two meanings. There's two sides of the coin, right? Depends which side you actually start looking and behaving at. So let me sort of go around again and get sort of peel the onion to one level deeper. So we've talked a little bit about how we've responded or reacted to the crisis, and how what has happened to skills, what kind of emphasis has been placed on on the softer professional skills, the need to basically build elements of trust to make sure people continue to perform, the importance of agility, the importance of using blended tools. and the fact that leadership plays a big role in that. And I think some of the initiatives that you spoke about and Guy spoke about, new initiatives were, I guess, very timely, and the way you structured your programs was very timely. But let's just go one level deeper beyond these initial comments. And now that we are sort of in the month of July, we are in the second half of the year, and most enterprises will now need to, what I call, enter the stage of reforming or reimagining. So I'd like you to sort of, I believe we've sort of reacted and responded, and many of you have described how that has happened. But if you were to push yourself ahead, and if you were to reimagine and reform the talent development function, let's talk about the transformation of that function. I'm going to go around the table and ask Swatee to start in the same order, to basically share with us what are some of the things, or what is that one thing, because I'm sure there's a lot to do. But let's focus on that one thing that you believe in the future from a transformation perspective will be very different in the talent development space for you and your teams than it was ever before. And we'll go around and get 5 different perspectives about that.
Yeah. So the one thing that will make us approach our talent development endeavors differently is the way we look at, I call it, like I'm putting it in terms of, it has to be integrated. Okay, very important. It has to be like very compelling, something which is very purposeful. So for example, at Dr. Reddy's, we say good health can't wait. So talent also has to find a purpose in how it adds up to their career journey and the company's growth story. So therefore, very compelling that way. And then it also has to be very relevant in the current times. See, relevance is currency, because it's how you keep on adding value and multiplying it. So that is very important. And the confluence between making it learner-centric and business-centric. So you have to be innovative and impactful at the same time. So all this, I'm flinging some words together, but trust me, it's a very difficult task. And the way we've decided to approach it at Dr. Reddy's is taking a very systematic, disciplined, rigorous approach, where we not only focus on the urgent and the important needs also are there. So we strike the balance between the urgent and important, where we are building a talent pool pipeline. So we are looking at ideal profiles. Every person, role holder in the organization, should be able to add value in the role. We are looking at skills. And when we say skills, is a repertoire of skills, technical and behavioral skills. And that's the softer part, which we all spoke about. And in doing all this, I think one thing, if you ask me, that stands out and is most important for me is the culture. That is the investment that you have made. And it's the culture that really holds you in both good and bad times. And we've really seen that come alive in Dr. Reddy's, because being a pharma company, business continuity was so important. We had people who had to turn up at work every day because that was important. So they were really the Corona warriors in that sense. You also had the support teams who were working from home, long hours, continuing unabated. But really the character came out in these turbulent times. It was the spirit of the organization, the resilience, the growth mindset. So therefore, I say that the investment in culture is truly the investment towards talent development for them to flourish. That is what we should do.
I think the HR people, the learning people in our profession, use this culture word very freely. I think it has been tested in many enterprises in the current environment. And I think it has been best exemplified, I think, by people in the medical profession or by the first responders, because their personal character as well as the organizational values, I think, is what has really stepped up. So, I completely agree with you that it has humbled a lot of us to see how people in that space have operated. But you said something which, I will talk to you separately. This whole thing about balancing urgent versus important, I think in the current fluid and distributed workforce environment, I think it's becoming more and more difficult to do. So I think anybody who can help, because even the many things that you said, to be able to figure out how to bring that all together, or what to attend first is difficult. It's a big challenge. So Anupam, how are you sort of, looking at reimagining things, if this is all that is on the agenda? And I'm sure there is some similarity to what you're seeing at Cisco or in your environment. How are you managing to prioritize, and what are you prioritizing?
Right. So I would say, a plus one to a lot of the things that Swatee mentioned, right? Because in terms of prioritization of that, but Prithvi, the way that I'd answer this question is by looking at a slightly more longer term lens and not necessarily in the current term lens, right? Because I think what's happening in the current lens is that I can speak for my organization, where we've just taken everything into a virtual space, right? We've just taken all our learning programs, all our development investments, and we've taken them to a virtual platform. But if you actually ask me in terms of, okay, how are we really thinking about talent development from a more longer term perspective, I will probably call out 2 points, right? So whatever investments we make in our people, they always lead to value to the organization, right? Either to our customers or to our stakeholders, right? So we always say that whatever investment we make is anchored in our business needs, but they ultimately lead to value for our customers and our stakeholders. And I think the need for us to start to look at these investments as a value and the impact it causes, and that outside in view is going to be more and more important for us versus having an inner looking lens. And I think that outside view is going to be key. I think the other one, and this is something that we're already exploring at Cisco, is that, when we typically look at talent development, we look at our existing workforce. But there is a massive potential workforce that is out there. And I think we also have to start to think about talent development, not just for our workforce that currently works with us, but also with respect to the potential workforce and what are the possibilities and the opportunities that we have there. So I think for us, if you ask how are we reimagining this, I would say these are the 2 things that I would call out.
No, very true. I think, I think business tends to look for people who will bring an outside in view into the organization. I think talent development has a big opportunity to encourage that kind of mindset amongst others, because it is so easy right now to just get bogged down into the here and now and the the challenges that are going on right now. Amit, from your perspective, what are you seeing? What is challenging? What is difficult? What are the one thing that you think, if you were to reimagine what the future will look like? You talked a little bit about it, about 2020, but if you were to go beyond, I would love to hear your thoughts as well.
So I think to answer this question, I kind of started my journey with the current organization just 6 months back, and with a mandate of how do we bring in a futuristic approach in the entire talent development, learning and development, OD, business transformation, as well as HR transformation. That's the kind of set of things. These are the set of things
that are
mandate. Right, but I think everything today is kind of woven together. And that's what we saw, that we need to create a fabric now. So what's in store for the next 3 years as a strategy for us is how is it that we can overlap 2 different roles? And that's what is coming out as a new futuristic way to look at things. One is how do we transform the business guys to understand the HR bit, and how do we make sure that the HR bit understands the business bit? So 3 years down the line, probably we'll have a workforce where an HR manager is one of the guys who is also there on the field and making sales for us. So that's where the outrospection will come in. That's where the empathy will come in. Right? We talk about empathy, but how do we really live empathy is when you really step into those shoes and do things. So currently what we're doing is we've already started mapping up even KPIs to an extent that we bring in an element of application of HR, as well as the HR would have KPIs to bring in an element of business in it. So when you have people with equal mindsets and understanding on the table, be business as well as HR together, then I think that's the way the future is going to be. Because the current gap, I think, is the HR would think that, this is something which is good. And maybe the business guy would say, what, guys, step on the field and you'll know what's really happening there. So that's something which we are working on as an overall transformation with a couple of other external agencies too. And I think that next 3-year journeys, we'll see a lot of change in designations. We'll see a lot of change in the roles and responsibilities. Also filling in any kind of no man lands area of who will do this work. So getting those precise JDs, etc. So I think the journey is a long journey. We'll have to predict how is it that you want to do work in the future, and I think we'll be able to create that future the way it is required.
I think the biggest issue talent development professionals tend to have, and I've spent too many years on the other side when my hair, where my hair turned white, is that the understanding of how work actually gets done, and to then be able to build skills which truly impact the work that people are doing. So I think your point about if we can actually transition to an environment where the people who shape the skill development agenda or the learning agenda actually have a real or have been able to walk in the shoes of people who are actually doing the work and applying those skills, I think is sort of the holy grail. If you will see a very different kind of professional, because unfortunately or fortunately, I'd go out on a limb to say that in our community there are many people who do not necessarily empathize with my respect for a person who does sales or a person who does operations or logistics has significantly enhanced over the last 6-9 months, that they've been able to still do what they do even in the kind of environment that they're in now. So I think this piece about understanding work, understanding what's the job really about is very critical. So thank you for sharing that. Harpreet, over to you. You sort of, your business is going to reset. It's not just talent development that will have to reimagine itself. I assume your businesses, or you were saying that, you very quickly transition to online, etc. So I'm sure your agenda or your priorities that you thought you'd be working on in 2020 may be very different than what you are going to actually be working on going forward. So what is the one thing that is occupying your mind about and focus on?
So very clearly, we're weighing two lenses. One is the short-term goal and one is the long-term goal, right? And short-term goal, we're grappling with numbers, and that's where the focus is. And very clearly, the next normal is a mix of remote and on-site employees, right? And that might create a risk of having to culture. And as Swatee mentioned, and I think even Anupam mentioned, culture is very critical for talent to thrive. Our experience says, and IBM, Yahoo, and HP, I think at some point in time, they had adopted this model, and their experience said that in-person culture dominates the culture which is experienced by the remote employees, right? And we also know that organizations thrive through a sense of belonging and a shared purpose, which might get lost when these two cultures get created. Like most of the companies are looking at having 1/3 employees work from home, or even more than that. And so that is something which is extremely important for us to look at. And this can make remote employees feel neglected. And, there is a bias, I'm sure, which we hear, that people at the head office or the on-site people, there's more favorism or meaty roles are given to them, and there are more celebrations and stuff. So therefore, extremely important for leadership to assess their style. The leadership will have to show up very differently the way they talk to a remote employee, the way they talk to an on-site employee. And, as we say, collaboration relatively happens easier in an on-site. You just walk and grab a coffee with somebody, hallway conversation. This will not happen with your remote employees. Structures will have to get created for informal interactions, which could be as simple as focusing on, 15-minute idle time before the Zoom, or an open door policy, or a fireside chat, or a virtual cafe, just to make the remote employee feel that, you have an access to the leader as much as people in the on-site. And the stance of the leader, he has to be very watchful right now. If he really wants to give a signal that, the virtual world and remote workers are equally valued, maybe once in a while he might want to just work virtually and say, hey, I'm equally productive. So I think extremely important for leaders right now to adapt technology, lead in a virtual world, lead in a world which is going to be working on a hybrid model, a combination of gig economy, absolutely, combination of remote employees, various location. How do we create a shared culture? That's one. Second, what is holding us right now, the juncture that we are. leadership is going to be questioned on how resilient is your model, how sustainable is your model. So the questions are not just going to get limited on get the revenue. How did you get the revenue? Where did the revenue come from? If this, what next? If this, then what is going to be why? So definitely leadership will have to demonstrate more sustainability, more resilience, and empathy, of course, with the kind of hybrid model that we're working on. So this is what we are trying to see how we can and work on. This is very critical for us right now.
Thank you. I'm going to change the question for Guy and Kavita a little bit, so I apologize. But I think, what I seem to take away from what my colleagues have, our colleagues have said so far is that, man, the job for a talent development leader has become much more complicated than possibly it ever was. It's become much more complex, but rather than just understanding the business strategy, understanding what competencies are needed, figuring out how best to deliver those competencies, measuring impact. I think that's just sort of now, it sounds like, par for the course. If you're not doing that, you're in the wrong job. And it's become, there is a much higher order of issues that we need to think about and really deal with the mindset of the individual much more than the mechanics of the skills that people just know. And if you don't bring the mindset and the mechanics together, possibly the business remains at risk. So my question to Guy, and then I'll come to you, Kavita, is really, so what advice do you have for the talent development guy or the learning leader who is sitting in this with this whole host of things that all of these people on the panel have sort of talked about? How are they going to, what would you suggest that how will they survive? How will they do what they need to do?
I'm going to pick up on a couple of things that have been mentioned already. One being culture, which I think is just critical. That helps with mindset. The second one is something that Amit talked about. HR people, learning people becoming more like business, vice versa. We're looking to partner with businesses in not just the development of whatever the tools content is, but also in the design of roles. So this work is changing, and that means jobs are changing, and the design of jobs needs to be different, and the ways of working will need to be different. Yeah, some jobs are going to be designed. I'm sure everybody on this call, organization is looking at, do we have to have all these jobs actually in the office all the time? Or some that will just be designed and hired for. So, my advice would be kind of picking up on Amit's point, which is about that really strong partnership with the business. My background, actually, I come from a business. Yeah. So when I joined HR, it kind of came with that kind of mindset. I think it's getting that mindset, across an HR and having that partnership. The businesses know their stuff. Yeah. And they can support, they can provide, a lot of what it is that we need. And then that, the design of roles, other roles right now, other ways of working to ensure that human connection that we've all talked about. Yeah, and we actually don't talk about soft skills in our organisation. We talk about human skills. They're the things that machines can't do, and we think won't be able to do. And so also equipping people with those human skills. That's probably a lot in one, but culture, partnership with the business, look at the roles and the ways of working, because they're changing. Yeah, they're changing. Kavita.
Thank you. No, I think that, that I think gives very actionable advice. So thank you for sharing that. I also, some of us who've spent many years in HR are trying to switch to the other side and get exposure in how to run a business. It's great to see that you sort of decided to come the other way. So I must learn about that separately at some point. Kavita, over to you. What would your advice be to learning leaders and talent development and people who are anchoring that agenda?
I think one of the most important things that any talent leader should do is visit the past to figure out what needs to be done for the future. And there is no cookie cutter approach that we can apply across all organizations. There is a history, there is a culture that's embedded in the organization that's got them to where they are. So for example, at UST, every single thing is anchored around the purpose, which is transforming lives. So every action that we take is how do you transform lives of your employees, of the clients, and of the society at large. So if it means walking away from certain deals, if it means doing a certain deal at a certain price point, everything is anchored around that. Everything is anchored around our three values, which is humility, humanity, and integrity. So for us, humility really fuels our listening, learning, and adaptive nature. The humanity defines our purpose of transforming lives. And integrity then turns out to become our identity. So with this as our core, it becomes very easy for us to plan for the future. The mechanics will fall in place. We will know that skills will change, the technologies will change. But if everyone's aligned to this mindset, then we know that whatever action is taken to make sure that this purpose is delivered. So my advice is people need to, so it's very easy to say that, the top 10 companies have done this and they have become successful. I'll do one from each and my company will become successful. It might not work that way. So we really need to look at a host of things, but most importantly, see what worked well in the organization and leverage what works well. But I think one point that Guy made I resonate with completely is get more business people into HR. I've come from business and it helps so much because you're able to give a business point of view. And when you take it back to business, business really can't question you much because you're taking the business flavor with the project or with the program they're taking back saying, hey, this is how you add value. This is how the ROI can be delivered. So, there needs to be a movement back and forth. So yeah, those are my two quick hints.
Thank you so much. Thank you. No, I think I love the, I think the piece, whoever, coined that, I think hit the nail on the head. We use the word transforming very easily on functions, but at the end of the day, there is an implication on people's lives, and not just about clients, etc., but even inside your own function, your own organization. And, I believe the learning function is going to see a lot of that happen. I know we are coming to the end of our conversation. So I'm just going to do a quick round robin. We'll try and keep the answer to not more than 1 or 2 words or 3 words if we can. If we were to sort of ask CEO or we were to ask our stakeholders, let's talk to the CEO directly. If you were to ask for one thing, and not maybe in your organization, but generally looking at the profession as a learning profession, if the learning profession was to ask CEOs for one thing, what would that one thing be? And, let's keep it as direct and hard hitting as possible. And we will wrap up with that, if that's okay. Let me go first. I think, one of the things that I think, we would ask for is for them to continue to walk the talk that many have started doing thanks to the crisis. I think there's been a lot of change in behavior in leaders who are finally becoming much more empathetic about their employees and doing things for them and with them, because they recognize the kind of strain and stress that the current environment has caused. So I'd ask them to continue to do that, to walk the talk, maybe more than they were doing earlier, maybe for as a start, but that would be my ask. What would yours be? Anybody who'd like to go first, or anybody have a point of view?
Sure, I can go first. So back in the organization, as Guy and Kavita were mentioning, we are, so L&D agenda back in Raymond is very, very aligned with business. So we really don't have that challenge. So I'm just thinking, what do I ask? Because I get everything, what we ask from business.
You're a lucky lady.
Together. So one thing I can still say right now is transparent communication and keep demonstrating empathy and build a culture where talent can thrive.
Thank you. That's great. Yes, Swati.
Yeah. I was wanting to say that this is not for my CEO, because I think a lot of it is already being done here at Dr. Reddy's, but this is for all CEOs or business leaders in general. To look at a more holistic approach towards talent development. To my mind, they're role modeling behaviors. So means like what you said, walk the talk. Second, most important is have systems and processes which enable people, because without that, talent will be all in vacuum. It won't thrive.
Absolutely.
Third is have communication, more communication and transparent integrity and all of that. And
Sure.
last but not the least, look at investments in skill and capability for the current and future as investments.
And I think the investment should start with people who are actually driving learning and talent development. I think if you don't sort of invest in that community, how will they invest in the rest of the community?
So Prithvi,
Anupam,
just one
Amit,
word there
sorry.
that comes to my mind for all us as L&D professionals here. I think we are at a very opportune moment to contribute to the business agendas at this time. It's important for us to upskill ourselves.
Absolutely. Thank you. Amit, Anupam.
Hey, Prithvi, so I'll probably answer your question, but I'll drop the development part from the question if that's okay, and I'll look at it
Please.
from a talent lens. And I think what I would ask is for continued partnership, advocacy, and sponsorship for our talent, and also to lean in to co-develop and co-create initiatives and interventions for our talent as needed.
Very nice. Thank you.
So my word was stolen. So actively sponsor is key, and I get that from our CEO. I think there's one more thing, and that's to influence. At the next levels. So actively influence, so that it's not just at the very top. It's actually filtering all the way down. So I'd say those two things. Go on, Kavita.
I think everybody needs to just move to the next level of visible support. I think that's, and I'm good. I think some of you have examples to share of that level of partnership. That's great to hear. Kavita, you were saying?
Yeah. So I think it's not just our CEO. So our CEO pretty much runs the learning agenda. He's very, very out there and makes sure that we are all on our toes. So I really no complaints from there. But I think every leader, especially in situations like we are undergoing right now, right, they need to be able to define reality and give hope at the same time. So they need to be able to, and when I'm saying define reality, it talks about transparent communication. It talks about, coaching them, empowering them, and just letting them know that, this is how it is. If they are open and transparent about what needs to happen, people are not worried about losing jobs or everything else. They're more worried about how it's going to get done. Or is it just going to be overnight where they wake up in the morning and the world has changed completely? If they understand the journey the organization is on and the context that certain actions are being taken, people are much more acceptable to what's coming their way. So yeah, for me, it is defining reality and giving hope.
Amit, you are bringing up you're closing the session.
So what I would have, to say is, I'm a Simon Sinek fan, so I'll start with the why part. Why is it that we need to do this? Is how do we turn HR into a profit center from a cost center, right? So as what I would want from my promoting team and the CEO is give me the time share, give me the mind share, and the skill share of all your managers, right from you to the first end guy, who can make a difference for the entire talent development within the organization. Because I think it's a collaborative effort. It cannot be done only by HR in silo. We have to do it together, and then the speed comes in. So I think that's my ask. The rest, I think budgets will come in place if we have all these things. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. Well said. And, thank you all for making my job much easier, because I think the amount of experience and insight and the kind of role and impact that each of you is having comes across in your comments. So I'm not going to take I'm going to be mindful that any ability of me to sort of try and summarize what you said will be very difficult. But I think you all have sort of shared a lot of perspectives right through, and I'm sure our audience will enjoy that thoroughly. I do think we are at an inflection point. I believe that, learning professionals, talent development professionals, I think there is opportunity today to truly become the partners that we've been working for a long time to sort of be recognized as. And I think each of you is an example of how that journey happens and gets that done. So I thank you again for sharing your experience and inputs, and I will wrap up and hand back the conversation to the ETHRWorld team. Thank you all for inviting us, and over to you.